Hey listeners, my name is Elisha, the founder of the Witnesses podcast. It's so beautiful to have you listening to our podcast, and I want you to know something that means a whole lot to me. Thank you for tuning in. And one thing I love to tell all of our listeners is it's not just about you listening, but listening to understand. Understanding is the most important thing, so important. So you have to listen, learn, and practice. Thank you so very much and happy listening.
Kim. It's so nice to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
It's so awesome, Elisha. Thank you so much for having me on. Your show is so encouraging and inspiring to others.
Yeah, thank you for that. Those kind words. Okay, oftentimes I love to talk about the essence of the show, which is to invite amazing guests like Kim to come talk to us about their triumphant stories, because we believe that in our audience there might be someone who is stuck up in a situation that came out of triumphantly. So by that person listening to you speak, he or she might actually pick an information from you that might lead to that transformation. So it's all about transforming lives. I'm so eager. I really love it to get to transform other people. So that's basically the essence of this show. So within the next few minutes, Kim, let us get started with your story, the challenges that you faced, and how you overcame them. Then afterwards, I've got some beautiful questions for you. Okay, Kim, over to you.
Well, my story begins when I'm 4 years old and my mother passes away. It was a very difficult time. I was so different from every other kid. Every other kid I knew had a mom. And I didn't feel it as so much until I went to school. And then it was very evident that I was different. I was also mulatto, or whatever the politically correct term is nowadays, but I'm half black, half white in an all white neighborhood. I was a head taller than any kid my age. I just always felt so different. And it it challenged me because I felt like I was missing out. And grade 2 came along, and I had this teacher, and she was beautiful, and she was smart, and she was talented, and I wanted to be a teacher just like her. And I loved her. I wanted her to be my mom. I went home every day and I dreamt my dad was going to marry her. Now she was probably already married. I don't know. But I dreamt my dad was going to marry her and she was going to come home and she was going to be my mom and she was going to take care of me. And because of that, I emotionally overwhelmed this poor woman because I needed a mother, and I thought she was going to be my mom. But in grade 2, another thing happened, and that was I learned how to write sentences. And the cool thing was is I had this very vivid imagination. In fact, I still do. But now I could write out the stories that were in my head all the time. And I don't know about you, but I remember the first time, I wrote out my story on the paper and I drew my little picture, which was horrible. Okay, I still can't draw any better than I probably could back in grade 2. But I remember handing that to her and she looked at it and she said how good it was. Well, that was all my 7-year-old grieving little heart needed. And so I started writing and writing and writing, writing. And, I was handing her piles like this every day. And I wanted her to affirm me. But what happened is I was overwhelming the poor woman. I always wanted her to pick me first. I'd get hurt if she didn't pick me. There was a lot of things going on. And looking back at it, I'm pretty sure she was trying to get me to back off a little bit. But I can promise you, probably in the late 60s, early 70s, that they didn't have courses in teachers' college on how to deal with 7-year-old grieving little girls. And so, in a moment of frustration, she looked at me one day and she said, "Kim, stop writing. You're not a good writer." And in that moment, my heart was just crushed. And I believed her. And I didn't write again for 30 years. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, I passed school, I passed high school, I did all my papers, I wrote the things I had to write. Actually did fairly well in English in school. But I never wrote for me. I never wrote the things that I wanted to share with others, the things that were important to me. I wrote the things I had to, not the things I wanted to. So fast forward 30 plus years. I'm married, I've got kids, I'm now an entrepreneur. It's 2011 and I'm getting a website. Oh, that was a bucket list dream to have my own website. And back then you could create your own websites, but it wasn't easy. And so one of my mentors was creating a website for me, and I was so happy. I was so excited. I'm getting my own website. And he finishes it and he sends me an email and he says, "Okay, Kim, your website's ready. Now we have to set up your blog." Now, I had been reading blogs for quite a while. I just didn't know what they were called. And so I wrote him back. I said, "What's a blog?" And I'll never forget the first few words that he sent back to me. He says, "Kim, you have to write." And in that moment, I was in a God-inspired crisis with those words. Because all of a sudden, in my head screamed, "Kim, do not write. You're not a good writer." And I actually kind of went, whoa, where is that coming from? And it was so loud, like it screamed in my head. And I thought to myself, okay, there's something going on here. Like I've got to explore this. I mean, my body physically is telling me, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And yet the still small voice of God is saying, I've got something more for you. And so I went through a process where, I thought about it, I prayed about it. And all of a sudden this memory came back of the teacher. And I realized that I had been subconsciously carrying those words, that every time I went to write, it was just a little voice in my head said, "Don't write, you're not a good writer." It wasn't loud, but it was just enough that I'm like, yeah, I'm not a good writer. I shouldn't write. And when I remembered that, I knew I had to do something with it. I knew I had to let those words go because God was telling me that it was time to do something else. And so I went through a process where I took responsibility for my own actions. I recognized the fact that I emotionally overwhelmed this poor woman. I realized that she didn't say it because she meant it. She said it because she was frustrated and didn't know how to deal with me. I chose to forgive her, and then I had to write. And back then, I wrote everything on paper and typed it in the computer. Let me tell you, that is a very long process. I learned how to type. But 50 to 60 crumpled pieces of paper on the floor later, I had my first blog post. And I let a couple of people read it, and they loved it. So that was all this 40-something-year-old heart needed at the time. And I started writing blog posts. Then it was books. And we don't have enough time because that's a whole story in and of itself to share writing books. But what I can tell you is almost every day I came within a hair's breadth of not writing that first book. And I had to learn how to do everything myself. I would Google things. I'd pay $7 on Udemy for courses to answer one question. My laptop almost went out the window so many times. The only reason it didn't was because my husband's a computer guru, and if I'd thrown the laptop out of the window, he probably would have divorced me. But the books came. And then the next critical moment came in 2015. My son's getting married, and we have two cars that we're driving by faith. So, Elisha, I don't know if you've ever driven a car by faith before, but this is where the car is no longer repairable, or at least it's not worth putting the money in to repair it. and you don't have the money to replace it. So you get in the car and you pray to the Father that you make it to where you have to go. You do what you have to do. You get back in the car and you pray that you make it back home again. It was that kind of year. And of course, with our sons getting married, a lot of the main focus was making sure that he had an amazing wedding day. And I was sitting on a freelancer site. Like I said, I can't draw worth a darn, and looking for a graphic designer. And God just spoke to my heart and he said, why don't you check out writing jobs? I can do that. So I started checking out writing jobs. I couldn't believe what people were paying for writing jobs. So I started taking on writing jobs. And because I could do everything myself, because I had learned how to do everything to create books, within a year, I had so much business coming in. I started RTI Publishing, which is River Tree Inspirational Publishing, based on Psalm 1. And by 2017, I had realized that this was really my calling. And I gave up some other things I was doing, and I went full-time into it. And since then, we have grown, we have changed, I've redefined my target market, and I love helping, professionals and consultants and speakers to get their message out there. I work with amazing people who want to change the whole world, but some of it. The ones they were created to change.
Yeah.
And my job is to help them to get their messages out there in the written form. And so that's kind of my story. And thank you so much for giving me an opportunity today to share it.
Adele, you've got a beautiful story, That's amazing. Okay, so shall we begin with the questions now, Kim?
Sure.
All right. So the very first one says, how can I use a book to sell? Okay, let me put it like this. How can I use my book to sell my services?
So I want you to think of it in terms of visibility and credibility. You are not going to make the money from the sale of the book. So please don't make that your goal to sell books, because that's going to leave you frustrated. But when you write a book, and I call it the create method. So when you write a book that creates authentic relationship, reveals the real problem, educates and engages, when you have an authentic message, when it's targeted, that's one of the key ones, and when it is excellently done, and you get that book into that targeted market's hands, what happens is you now become visible and credible. And when you are visible and credible, the know, like, trust factor comes in, also the belief factor. When they read your book and they feel like they know you, and they believe that you are the one that can help them solve their problems, then guess who they choose to work with? It's you. So the book becomes a marketing, lead generation, objection overcoming tool that you use to let people into your world in a way that shows them that you are the person that they need to work with.
I got that. Okay, you mentioned the create method. Okay, so what is the create method and how do you use it to write books? I want you to talk more on that.
So when you think of the create method, when you're looking at writing the book itself, you want to look at it in terms of goals, and you want to look at it in terms of what do you need to have in that book. So when I talked about create authentic relationship, the goal of the book is not to sell your products and services. If that's the goal of your book, it will come through in the book, and you will reek of what we call commission breath, where, people can just see, oh, you just wrote this book, so I would work with you. So that's never the goal. The goal is not to sell your products and services. Now, will you sell products and services? Yes, but that's not the goal of the book. Think of it as an introduction. So you want to write the book in such a way that it creates a relationship with the reader. You want to dive down into the real problem. Most people think their problem is A, and that's what's holding them back from achieving what they want to achieve in life. But as the expert, you know the problem's B. So I'll give you an example, Elijah. Are you married?
No, not yet.
Yeah? Okay. No? Okay. Do you have a significant other in your life?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So a woman walks into the bathroom and she looks at the toilet paper roll and she's fuming because her husband has put it on the wrong way again. So people would look at that and say the problem is he put it on the wrong way. An expert would look at that and go, that's not the real problem. The problem is she feels unloved because he doesn't care enough about her to put the toilet paper roll on the way that she prefers it, the way that makes her life easier. So when you're writing the book, you've got to get down to the real problem. You've got to educate. So, once you've revealed the real problem, you have to give them the solution. You have to tell them why, what, and some of the how. Because most of the times, the how is not always easy to translate into a book. That's usually something that your product or service is going to take care of. But you have to give them some of the how. And you have to engage. You have to give them a way of connecting with you outside of that book so they can find out more about you and your products and your services. Targeted. If you write to everyone, you're writing to no one. You want to think of the somebody, that one person that your product and service is going to make the most difference in, and you're going to write that book to them. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't other people and aren't other niches and aren't other categories of people that the book will minister to, will have an effect on. But you want to write it to the person that will have the greatest effect on. And then finally, E, excellently done. Has to be written well. Has to be edited well. Has to be formatted well. So the interior has to look good. Has to be proofread. Okay, 1 or 2 typos in a book isn't a big deal. And by the way, if you think your book has to be perfect, please get that out of your mind because no book is ever perfect. I can share with you stories. One of my clients, we'd had 10 people proofread the book before it went to print. I myself had gone through the book. The client had gone through the book. He had sold 1,000 copies. It had been out for 18 months, and over 1,000 people had read the book. And 18 months in, somebody found a typo. No book is ever perfect. But it needs to be excellent. And you have to have a professionally done cover. Because contrary to prior popular belief, in 2024, people do buy a book, or at least consider buying a book by its cover. So if you want to be seen as the go-to person, you can't slap something together. This has to be carefully considered. It has to have a professional look and feel to it. So that means you are going to be putting out money for this book. Now, how much? Depends on where you live. It depends on the resources available to you, So here's a hint, a tip for you. One of the first people I brought into RTI Publishing was my best friend, Juanita. And the reason I brought her in is she's one of the most amazing editors I've ever known. Editing is not my strong point. I'm okay at best. She's amazing. But before she was my editor, because she was my best friend, she would read things for me that I wrote and basically do little edits on them for me. And pretty well everyone probably has a friend who was really good if you're English or whatever language you are. And, she was so honored when I asked her to edit because she loves to edit. She lives, breathes, and sleeps it. She can't read anything without editing it. And so the first time I asked her to proofread or edit something for me, she was very honored. Now, if you're using this person all the time, you have to pay them. Okay, like this is not take advantage of someone, right? Especially if you're using this for your business. But the first couple of times she did it free for me because she was my friend and she loved me. So there are people in your life who are very good in your language, especially English, who would probably be honored to proofread a book for you. So, there are some ways that you can do things less expensively, but there are some things that you absolutely, if you do not know how to do yourself or do not have the skills to do it yourself, cover is one of them. Because people won't even open the book to look at the table of contents unless they like the cover. Has to be formatted. The interior has to look good. If the interior doesn't look good, it's visually distracting and people stop reading the book. Edited. If there are typos, spelling mistakes, major grammatical things going on, people get distracted by that. And again, it stops them from reading the book. So you want to make sure that you set aside the money for those things to do them properly. If you're going to invest the amount of time it takes, invest the money too. And if you don't have the money right now, save up, because it is definitely worth it to do it right the first time.
Oh my God, Kim, oh man, you're so knowledgeable, I tell you, Kim. Your words are filled with amazing insight. Nah. I'm so happy about this episode because I know that the audience are going to learn one or two things from what you've said so far. Beautiful. Okay, so in conclusion, let's say there is one piece of advice you'd like to give to the audience. What would that be? And let's say there is someone listening, or there are someone listening that would like to learn more about what you do, reach out to you. How can that be possible?
So 2 things. First of all, don't be afraid to shine as an entrepreneur. You were created to have an effect in a person's life. And if you don't shine, if you don't let the person see it, that one person who may need you may never, ever get the help that they need. So don't be afraid to be visible and get yourself out there. Also, do things well. So if you're going to do a book, do it well. So those are my 2 pieces of advice. If you want to connect with me, there's 2 ways to do it. One, I have the Author to Authority podcast. So this is for consultants, professionals, speakers. If you're looking to use a book to build your business, we cover all sorts of topics from book publishing, how to use a book, to marketing, sales, networking. This is all about authority marketing, using a book to build your business. So we cover all sorts of topics. The Author to Authority podcast is available on every major podcast app. You can also check out Author to Authority on YouTube. And if you want to connect with me personally, one of the best places to do that is LinkedIn. I've got lots of teaching and training on there too. And if you're on the show and you heard me on here, connect with me on LinkedIn, DM me and let me know that you heard me on the show. And I will gladly offer you some free resources that I have available for you, and I will customize them depending on where you're at in your book publishing journey.
Thank you for the free resources. Thank you so very much, Kim. All right, so thank you for honoring the invite, Kim, and thank you for coming. That's going to be the end of the show. Thank you so very much.
I'm very honored. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for tuning in to this incredible episode. Your support means the world to us, and we truly value you. We look forward to having you join us for the next episode. If you enjoyed what you heard, please consider rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. Your feedback is greatly appreciated.